Svetlana Kravtsova, a former dancer in the Soviet Union, once said, "Communism was never really a thing. It was an idea, a good idea, that just never really worked." Communism began in the Soviet Union in October 1917 under the rule of the Bolshevik Party. It was the idea that everyone had an equal amount of necessities. This meant that if someone couldn't find a job, they could still have a home and food to live, but it also meant that if someone worked very hard, they weren't rewarded for it. Industry and land were completely owned by the government, and individuals could not make their own profits. As stated in The Cold War by David Taylor, wealth was more evenly shared, but there was a lower standard of living in general. The Soviet Union also tried to gain prestige by having the best system. This was part of what created their beautiful dancers, because dance was their priority. At about the age of 9 or 10, thousands of dancers auditioned for just a few spots in the school. They were chosen by their physical attributes and their potential to be a technical and artistic dancer. If they were chosen, they would have to leave their families and live in a dorm to study for 8 years in a very strict environment. Ballet wasn't fun, it was harsh training, but this education produced some of the finest ballet dancers in the world. These dancers were highly regarded in the Soviet Union. However, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and this system abruptly ended. The effect of the fall of communism on ballet in the Soviet Union was a turning point in Russian history. Because the government no longer provided the dancers with their needs, many dancers fled the country, yet the ones that stayed had more freedom to travel to other countries for performances. After the fall of communism happened and the Soviet Union broke up, the government no longer provided the dancers with their needs. During communism, the government provided the student dancers with free education and food. The dancers had coupons for each month of food. Also, most dorms for the students were free, and if they weren't, they were still very cheap. The uniforms that the dancers wore to class were also free: white leotards, white socks, and white ballet slippers. The dancers and companies also got free dancewear. Dancers also had paid vacations, got paid if they were sick, and paid maternity leave. The company, which got its money from the government, gave the dancers their makeup, costumes, and did their hair for them before performances. We had everything we needed before the fall of communism. It was all free. The food, education, leotards, shoes, socks, everything. We could buy things if we wanted, but we didn't need to, as stated by Svetlana Kravtsova. Altogether, dancers didn't have to worry about anything before communism ended. Once communism fell, however, all of these benefits were gone. The theaters didn't have much money. Their already small amount became none. This meant that the dancers didn't have much either. They had to find ways to get what they needed themselves, such as food and clothing. With no food and no pay, the dancers kept working. As stated by author K.K. Cashin, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the ballet companies have been handicapped by cuts in funding and support. Without the government's support, the theaters were in a terrible situation. People in the former Soviet Union that weren't dancers, however, were definitely better off than they were during communism. When communism ended, the general population may have liked it better, but dancers were worse off than they were before. Many dancers fled the country in hopes of finding a new company and good pay after the fall of communism. People lost everything because they didn't have any money to pay for things that they needed. It was so hard for people to get food that many people had to grow their own. As stated in the New Internationalist website, although Russia is largely an urban society, 3 out of every 4 people grow some of their own food in order to survive. The theaters never had much money, but then they had absolutely none. No one was in charge of them once the Soviet Union broke apart, so they were in a very bad situation. Dancers just had no way to make money or have a career, so they fled to other places like Europe or the United States. It was very hard to make money. The dancers left in hopes of making enough money to support themselves. If you didn't have money, you have nothing, as stated by Svetlana Kravtsova. Many dancers fled to the West, where European ballet troupes benefited from their technical brilliance and developed as a result, as stated by the Where Russia website. Even though it was hard for dancers, and other people too, to make a salary after the fall of communism, they could travel to other countries with their company and make money there. Dancers couldn't travel abroad freely during the Soviet era. When they traveled during the Soviet era with the company, they were not allowed to do what they wanted to do. They had to stay with the company. If dancers wanted to travel freely, they would defect. Rudolf Nureyev defected on June 16, 1961. The Kirov company finished a run in Paris. Just as the company was preparing to board a flight home, Nureyev broke from the group and insisted that he was staying in France, as stated by the History Channel website. The first Russian ballerina to defect was Natalia Makarova. She defected in 1970, 9 years after Nureyev. She was on tour in London with the Kirov Ballet. She had climbed to the top ranks of Russia's Kirov Ballet. And then she walked away, as stated by the Washington Post. Something tell me this is the moment. I cry like crazy. Cry. As stated by Natalia Makarova herself. In a 2012 interview on CBS's 60 Minutes, Peter Martins, the director of the New York City Ballet, said, "I have a theory. The Soviet Union fell, so the greatest popularity ballet had in history was when the Russian defectors, Baryshnikov and Nureyev, defected. They gave it a mystery." Following that statement, Leslie Stahl concluded, "The Russian defectors made ballet part of the Cold War. Going to see them was going to see heroes." Many dancers did flee to other places after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the ones that stayed were free to travel anywhere in the world. While it was hard to make money in the former Soviet Union, dancers traveled with the company to other countries like Europe or the United States to perform. When they did performances there, they could earn money. It was very, very hard to make money, but we traveled a lot after the Soviet Union broke up. We traveled everywhere and we earned money there, as stated by Svetlana Kravtsova. Even though it was worse for dancers as far as having what they needed when communism ended, the ones that stayed in their country had the benefit of traveling to many other places. During the Soviet era, dancers were better off than most people. They were provided with everything they needed and were treated like royalty. After the Soviet Union broke apart, however, dancers were no longer provided with the resources they needed. Since Russia is no longer communist, the theaters are still in a terrible situation. They don't have any money. There is no one in charge because the previous directors had been high-ranking communist officials. Also, dancers no longer get their necessities and still don't get much money. When many dancers fled to the West, European and American dance companies learned from the beautiful Russian dancers and thrived as a result. Other people that aren't dancers can work and live well, though, and can now build on their lives and choose what they want to do. As stated in a book titled The Dancer Who Flew by Linda May Barduck, communism seemed to offer great hope, but in practice it was not the ideal of what people had dreamed. The effect of the fall of communism on ballet in the Soviet Union was a turning point in Russian history because the government no longer provided the dancers with their needs. Many dancers fled the country, yet the ones that stayed had more freedom to travel to other countries for performances.